Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we're talking about 11 VCT Americas players that have something to prove in 2024. So what does that mean? Basically, these are players that either have had trouble histories in Valorant so far, or maybe are up-and-coming rookies that need to prove that they were the right choice for their teams. Maybe these players have a chip on their shoulder, or people are expecting not very much from them. It can be a variety of reasons, but basically things that should keep these players motivated to try to have a really good 2024. So we're going to do one player from each team in the VCT Americas. We'll see if I do these for the other region, but for now we are doing the Americas. So we're going to be starting from left to right, starting with Loud, beginning with Quick. So when looking at Loud, most of these players have already proven enough at the tier 1 level to not really warrant being on this list, so I decided to go with their new addition. So Quick honestly doesn't really have that much to prove because people aren't expecting him to be an ass pass replacement, but I do think he does have to prove that he was the right choice for Loud to go out and get. He's already performed very well in the kickoff tournament so far. We'll see how he does in the playoff stage, but he seems like what this team was looking for. A player that can fill whatever role that they need him to, a player that can be flexible, and it seems like it's worked out so far, but we'll see how it goes throughout the long stretch of the season. This is just the start of the season. It is a very long season. Moving on to Energy, and this is another team where it's kind of hard to find a player that really has something to prove because literally every single one of these players is a previous world champion. So I decided to go with Mard because while he did perform pretty well on Sentinels last year, I do think he didn't play, and it's even been said by other players, he doesn't think he played to the level that he thinks that he could on Sentinels. He was the IGL on that team, and he's not known for being an IGL, so it was a role that didn't really fit what Marved can bring. So I think on Energy, he has already shown that he is still that good smokes player back on the Optic roster. And I don't think that he has a lot to prove. He just has to prove that he can still be that solid smokes player, which he has already. Again, we'll see how the launch season ends up for him. But I think just when you look at Energy just as a roster, he's probably the player with the most to prove. You could say Ethan, you could say Demon 1, but I think people don't expect a ton out of Ethan because they already know what Ethan brings. He's a good, solid player that's going to be a good piece on your team. And Demon 1 does have to prove that he can be at the same level that he was last year on a new roster, and he's already kind of there. So I decided to go with Mar because I thought it made the most sense. Moving on to Crew, I decided to go with their rookie player in MTA. Decent start for MTA at the kickoff tournament. I mean, this team in Crew have only played G2 so far this year. Losing both of those matches, that team looked like they could have won the first match, but ended up blowing their lead. MTA did look good at points during that first match, but they did end up losing that one and then lose the next one. So while MTA, the early returns are decent but not great, it's for rookies, it's going to be a long learning experience for a lot of them. I know a lot of rookies so far have performed very well, but keep in mind, this is the start of the year. We're going to see players do well at the start and then kind of fall off later. We're going to see players, look kind of bad at the start and then get really good. So it's just, with MTA, it's just going to take some time. I do think Crew have more in them than what they've shown thus far, and hopefully MTA is a big part of them turning their season around. Moving on to Evil Geniuses, you could basically say the entire roster aside from Giacomo, because Giacomo's already proved that he is a world champion. So I went with Derek because I think Derek, he was one of the worst players in Tier 1 just in the entire world last year. That 100 Thieves team really had a rough year, and him just not proving much on that team that he can be super effective. He did have a great match against G2, and he was wearing the 100 Thieves team capsule skin for the classic with a little snake gun buddy. I thought that was very funny. But again, it's just one match. Derek has to prove that he can be a consistently good Tier 1 player. He was good in 2022 for 100 Thieves, and he wants to prove that he can continue to be effective for Evil Geniuses. He has a lot to prove this year, and I really hope he does it. Moving on to G2, again, you could say most of their roster, Trent has to prove he's really good, Leaf has to prove he can still be a very effective duelist, but I decided to go with the highly praised Valen. Valen gets high praise from his teammates, Net saying in an interview that he believes he is one of the best IGLs in the Americas, aside from Sadek, of course, but I do think Valen, the early returns for G2 have been very mixed. They were very inconsistent during kickoff. I think part of it was his calling wasn't 100% good. I'm not pinning their losses entirely on him, but as the team leader, some of the comps they were running, some of the strategies they were doing, it just didn't seem to fit at the Tier 1 level fully yet. They did technically beat Sentinels, but those last two maps weren't really real maps because Sentinels had already qualified for playoffs, so I'm not putting too much stock into that. But I do think Valen, he can can be one of the best IGLs in Americas. I really want to see it for him. He's a great guy. I think he's a great IGL, and I am absolutely rooting for him. Moving on to 100 Thieves, it's got to be Asena, right? Asena has been on 100 Thieves for a very long time. I do believe he is the longest tenured player on that roster as of right now. When he was coming up all the way back in 2021, he was seen as one of the better younger players in Valorant. When the Valorant pro scene was infested with former CSGO pros, Asena was one of the bright lights as the future of Valorant. I don't think he's fully lived up to expectations yet. There's been some really good performances, really good individual performances, really good maps, but nothing consistently super concrete, really good. He had a rough first map against Sentinels. He looked really lost there, but he did recover later in that match. He's a very vocal guy, as, if you watch the Comm's video, wow, this guy's just yelling the whole time. But I think, you need to find a role for Asena that looks really good for him. He's been playing that Raze, so playing that Duelist. We'll see if he ends up staying on that. I think for him, just whatever role he ends up playing, he has to prove that he can be one of the top players in VCT Americas, because that's what 100 Thieves expected from him when they picked him up. So I really hope he can finally get to that level and make international tournaments and make 100 Thieves a competitive team again. Moving on to Leviathan, I went with Comm. So Comm has proved that he can be a world champion, yes, but I think the main thing that puts pressure on him is the fact that they dropped Noswer to bring him in. And the thing is, they dropped Noswer, but they just moved him to the inactive roster. So he's still a part of the Leviathan organization. But they did that move late in the offseason when they've already performed in offseason events and they were looking good in them. Aspas not happy about the change because he wanted to play with Noswer. It kind of coming out of nowhere for the roster. I mean, at least some of the players. But they probably picked him up mainly because of his world champion prowess, which isn't a terrible idea, but at the same time, not every player from that 2023 EG roster is going to have the same kind of year this year. I think if I were to choose players at risk of that, I would say Boostio and Comm. Comm had some really good moments in kickoff, some not so great moments. I think his overall stats weren't great. I still think he's a very good player and those stats will get better. But I do think the pressure is definitely going to be on him to prove that Leviathan made the right choice, because if management ends up looking like an idiot for that choice, I mean, Comm's going to get benched and then Noswer's going to get brought back. So he's got to prove to the team that he was the right choice, and he's got to do it whenever we see Leviathan next. Moving on to Cloud9, a lot of players on this roster can absolutely be candidates for this list. I kind of wanted to put Vanity because he's been in IGL for a couple different teams now, and he hasn't been able to bring a team to an international event in quite some time. But I do feel like Oxy kind of has a chip on his shoulder after kickoff. A lot of praise from Oxy in the offseason, a lot of doubters for Oxy in the offseason as well. I mean, Demon One himself saying that he thinks that he's the worst duelist in Americas, which I think that comment was so entirely overblown, and it was kind of annoying to me because he just said it in like a video, because they were doing like a list video for Energy Valorant YouTube, and it felt like he was just putting a name out there that they didn't really know much about. And it's like Oxy's young, and it's like, I don't think Demon One meant any malice towards him by saying that. And Oxy, to his credit, kind of used that as motivation against Energy. Didn't end up mattering because they lost to Energy, but I do think Oxy definitely has something to prove. I mean, they picked him up expecting him to be a really good young duelist player, and he has shown flashes of that so far. But at the same time, this team lost to MBBR to not qualify for play-in, and Oxy, overall not having a great performance. He looked great against their first match against MBBR, but I definitely thought that performance was maybe hyped up a bit too much because we just hadn't seen enough from either of those teams yet. So for Oxy going forward, he's going to have to prove that Cloud9 made the right choice bringing him in, and that he can be one of the top IGLs in the world. And not just the world, just America. Start small. I do think it's going to take Oxy a while. He is young, so we'll see how he develops, but I think he has a bright future. For Furia, you could go with a couple players, but I decided to go with Havoc. This is another rookie pick, so about 3 rookie picks to my count on this board. Havoc had a terrible first map against Energy, looked better in the second map, but they ended up losing, and then they also lost to MBBR. There was definitely some praise for Havoc in the offseason and going into this season. He hasn't quite shown that yet. As I said with both Oxy and MTA, it's going to take some of these rookies time to develop and get comfortable in this Tier 1 system. Unfortunately, Havoc can't really play too much because his team was out right away, but I do think with Furia seeing Havoc as a good pickup, I do think he definitely has something to prove because, You know, esports can be very ruthless, especially for rookies. You know, if you don't prove yourself right away, if you don't have like a huge audience or whatever, you can definitely find yourself on the outside looking in. Just ask Ye. He was the most popular player in the entire world because he was the best player in the entire world, and even he got dropped. So esports is incredibly ruthless when it comes to player movement. So for Havoc, he's going to want to prove that he can stay on that team for as long as possible and be part of the reason why Furia turns their season around. Moving on to MBBR, who personally I thought was one of the more surprising teams in kickoff. And when I was thinking about players that need to prove themselves, again, it's probably most of them just as a unit. I think they need to prove themselves, but I ended up going with one of their new additions in Artisan. So he's their duelist player, and he has performed pretty well overall. And, you know, it was just kind of a hard choice choosing a player for this team, but I went with him because, you know, he's a good player, he's a solid player. We'll see if he can prove himself to be one of the top IGLs in the Americas. If he can push himself into the conversation for like top 5, I would say that he would have a very good season to be able to do that. It's a long road ahead for Artisan and MBBR. I actually am pretty confident in this team's chances, so we'll see how it goes. But, you know, if MBBR are going to prove themselves as a top team, Artisan is going to be a part of that turnaround. And last, but certainly not least, we have Sentinels. And is it any surprise that it's TenZ? Now, any Sentinels fans watching this video, if you skip to this part of the video just to see your team, hi, welcome to the video. But you might be saying, well, TenZ has already proved himself. He's already had a great kickoff. He's looked great in this controller role. He looked good in the offseason. Now he looks really good. So what else does he have to prove? It's one tournament, guys. It's one tournament. It's just the season starter. It's just the season kickoff. They haven't even qualified for Madrid as of recording. They very well could beat Energy on Saturday. That'll be a big test for that Sentinels roster overall, but I still think it's going to take some time for TenZ to really prove himself, to really make me a believer that he can get back to that 2021 form. I don't really think he has to. I think the pressure on him is way, way less than it was in previous seasons because now Sentinels have a bit of a safety net around him where he doesn't need to be the only person fragging, the only person playing Jet, the only person being that star duelist player. Now you have Zekin, who is mainly that duelist player now, playing that Jet role. I think the only duelist that TenZ plays now is Yoru on Bind, which we already know he's very good at. But with TenZ, you know, this is his year to really prove that he is still not just, you know, a good player, but a tier 1 player. I think if he ends up having another rough season, you know, again, it's off to a good start, but it could fall apart later on. This is a do or die year for TenZ. If he can't prove that he can hang with the big boys, I do think we eventually find him on the outside looking in when it comes to the tier 1 Sentinels roster. Do I expect that to happen? No, I do think TenZ ends up staying on the team past 2024, but I do think he has to prove himself this year for that to be true. Let me know what you guys thought of this video in the comment section down below. Which players would you choose would have something to prove in the year 2024? Please click like if you enjoyed the video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.